Welcome to Woman Things, the podcast, a show dedicated to women who want to connect with their bodies and optimize their health for a more holistic and balanced life. We are your hosts and women's health experts, Cara Moore and Kirsten Humphreys, and we will be taking you on a journey of education and empowerment.
Stay tuned each week while we break down all the hottest topics in women's health today, including food and nutrition, periods, gut and skin health, fertility, and everything in between. You can find us on Instagram at Woman Things, that's woman, WOMXN, and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform to keep up to date with all the latest episode releases. We hope you enjoy the episode today, and thanks so much for tuning in. Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Woman Things, the podcast. Today we're joined by a special guest and non-diet nutritionist to dive deep into the topics of dieting and disordered eating patterns, body positivity, and how to foster a more positive relationship with food. We live in a society where diet culture has conditioned us to believe that a thin or fit body type is the ideal, and anything less than that can make you feel like you're not good enough as a person, or you might not be quote unquote healthy. But instead of promoting health and well-being, diet culture actually has resulted in causing food and body obsession, a loss of being in tune with our own body's needs, self-hatred, a rise in eating disorders, discrimination against different body types, and subsequently also poor health issues. So before we bring on our lovely guest today, we're just going to quickly introduce ourselves. So I'm Cara. I'm a clinical nutritionist and fertility awareness educator. I have a dedicated online practice to helping those who are struggling with PCOS take control of their symptoms and regain their fertility. You can find me on Instagram at fempowered_health or on my website, www.fempoweredhealth.com. And as always, joined by my lovely friend and co-host, Kirsten.
Thank you. Just want to point out to our listeners that it's 7 a.m. recording for us right now because Nina, our guest that's going to be coming on with us, is in Australia. So because of the time difference, it's a little early for me and Cara. So we might be a little bit rusty, but yeah, bear with us. But yeah, I'm Kirsten. I'm a naturopathic nutritionist and women's health coach, and I help busy women struggling with PMS, hormonal imbalances, and stress manage their symptoms with nutrition, mindfulness, and healthy daily habits so they can live an amazing life. You can find me on Instagram at Kirsten Health or on my website at knhwellness.co.uk. So let's get our guest on, Cara.
Okay, so today we are joined by the lovely Nina Kingsford-Smith. Nina, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your time with us today. Can you share with us a little bit about your personal and professional journey and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. And thank you guys for having me as well. It's lovely to be here. So my personal and professional journey, to be honest, my original decision, like my initial decision to study nutrition was at a time when I was really struggling myself with food and body image, although I wasn't really aware of it at the time. I think looking back on it now, I can see that I thought the more that I knew about food and nutrition, the more I could sort of manipulate my own eating habits and body to look and be a certain way. And that sort of all started after I'd started to see a nutritionist myself and got introduced to MyFitnessPal, which is one of the main calorie counting apps. And it just sort of really all snowballed from there. And when I got really, really caught up in that world. And then not long after that, unsurprisingly, I started to develop a lot of digestive issues. So I started to see a different practitioner. This was a naturopath, and he got me to go on a certain therapeutic diet to try and control symptoms. And, you know, I was told only eat every 4 hours so that you're not snacking in between. And that further sort of fueled this sort of really tumultuous relationship with food, because I then was not only trying to control my food in terms of how I looked, but also for fear of how food was going to impact my digestion, and completely disconnected from, you know, my hunger cues and all this sort of stuff. But then sort of slowly throughout the degree studying nutrition, I think that really actually helped me to start to slowly heal my relationship with food. I started to see food in our bodies in a totally different way and had this newfound sort of respect and just amazement for our bodies. Like the fact that all our bodies want is for us to survive. That's their sole purpose, is for us to be happy and healthy. And that's all they want for us. I find that so amazing. And so it was really through learning through that I started to get more of this different focus on food and healing. And at the same time, I had some really, really amazing mentors around me, just, teachers, bosses, that sort of thing, and slowly started to see more of the non-diet movement and even body acceptance and stuff like that on Instagram. And sort of, now as a nutritionist, I'm just super, super passionate about helping people with their relationships with food. I think because I see it more and more as well, how many people are struggling with it. And I really believe it's not just what you eat, but it's your thoughts, your feelings, your behaviors around that are absolutely foundational to any sort of healing. So I want to make sure that I can help people with all of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I like, as you were saying that, I was just kind of thinking, like, even as I was studying, there was points where I started to kind of shift my relationship with food a little bit. Like, I was like, oh no, like I can't eat fries because I know what the fat is doing inside my body. And and that's not really a healthy way of thinking, because life's about balance, right? And you can really go like super far with all these thoughts and just kind of take it to a whole nother level. It's just really, the mental stress of that is going to be worse for you than the actual food a lot of the time. So it is something that we have to be careful of, especially as health professionals, when we're promoting sort of like a different way of eating for people.
Yeah, completely agree. And it's actually really interesting. There have been a few studies and surveys done amongst dietitians and nutritionists, and how many of those display disordered eating or eating disorder type behaviors and tendencies. And then when you just think about that, which makes sense why a lot of people do get into it or through studying it, but then when you do think about that and how much of that is then passed on to clients and patients, it is, whether intentional or not, I think completely unintentional. Everybody's very well meaning, but I think it's just something that as practitioners we have to be very, very mindful of, that we're not fueling a lot of that disordered eating.
Yeah, I actually had an experience in, because we had supervised clinics, and one of my supervisors was really, he worked specifically with eating disorders, and he actually failed me on one of my clinics in school because I had wrote to someone who had a prior experience of an eating disorder to kind of swap out gluten because of a potential of celiac. But even he said that was like a big no-no, and you have to be so careful with your words. So that was a big lesson for me. It's like kind of an eye-opening experience. Yeah, so just, you do have to be really careful, right?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned non-diet as a non-diet nutritionist. Can you just explain to us kind of what that means?
Yeah, definitely. So non-diet nutrition, it really honors you as the expert of your own body. So instead of focusing on external rules around eating, so that might be, what to eat, what not to eat, any sorts of diets, calorie counting, meal plans, eating according to the time of day, anything like that, it encourages you to step away from that and instead focus on internal cues around eating. So that might be things like hunger and fullness, like what does hunger actually feel like to you? Because it's going to be different for everybody. What does fullness feel like to you? How often do you feel the different levels of hunger and fullness? And can you notice patterns in all of that? What are your energy levels like, and how are they impacted by food? What about cravings, personal preferences in terms of likes and dislikes, all of this sort of stuff. And it teaches you to be able to listen to those cues, understand those cues, and act on them, so that you're really building from within when it comes to food. So it's a lot of education and skill building. It will involve a lot of things around, say, for example, mindful eating or intuitive eating. It really, the way I see it is it helps you build a lot of trust and confidence in your own body. It helps you make your own choices around food rather than having somebody else make those choices for you. It helps you become a lot more mindful and self-aware, not only of food, but of your body as well. And importantly, it also takes the focus away from weight loss to other sorts of health goals. And to me, that's really where the magic lies. It as well. So a lot of the time, non-diet nutrition will have a focus on helping people with their relationship with food. So people who are experiencing eating disorders or disordered eating sorts of behaviors. But importantly, it can help all sorts of health issues. So anybody that you'd see, like, quote unquote, a normal dietitian or naturopath or nutritionist for, those sorts of health issues, a non-diet nutritionist will also teach. They'll just do it from a non-diet lens. So, if that's gut issues, hormonal issues, skin, fertility, period problems, autoimmune, any sorts of things. It just, it does that from that non-diet sort of lens. And there's a woman called Fiona Willer. She's a dietitian. She's one of the sorts of leaders in the non-diet movement and the HAES movement as well, which stands for Health at Every Size, which is all about it's sort of a whole other topic, but it's like a very weight neutral approach to health. And she has this really good little sort of summary of the diet approach. When you think of dieting and the diet approach, there, you think of words like quantitative, in terms of, for example, calories. It's rigid. It's about good or bad foods. It's about rules and deprivation and all this sort of stuff. Whereas the non-diet approach, it's very flexible. It allows for all those nuances in life. It welcomes all foods. It's supportive. It's enjoyable. It's about satisfaction from food. And so it's a much more gentle sort of approach to food and health.
Yeah, no, that definitely sounds really important. And even like with a lot of people that I have been around and studied who are professionals, they do you do sort of accidentally take an extreme outlook on things because you should be eating all this way because it's healthy. And I think actually people expect that of you as a nutritionist as well. And I think they get surprised when they see you out eating like a burger or something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, even my brother used to be like, oh, all she eats is spinach and bell peppers. And I'm like, no, I don't. But it's always about adding in, right? That's the most important thing. Like, what can you eat more of to better your health?
Yeah, 100%. That's one of the key things. I think it's that abundance mentality rather than a scarcity sort of mentality. So what can we add, not what can we take away?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. So Nina, you've kind of covered my next question a bit, speaking about what diets are with all of that information that you've shared with us. But what I'd really like to chat with you a little bit about is why most diets don't actually work for people and what does this actually mean?
Yeah, great question. And I think a really interesting sort of stat that I find amazing to sort of start all of that is about when we say diets don't work, about 95% of people who go on a diet regain any weight that they've lost within about a 2 to 5 year period.
Crazy.
And about it's insane. And about 1 to 2/3 of those actually end up heavier than they were initially. So I think that just, at the forefront really puts it into perspective with when we say diets don't work, we really mean the very vast majority actually don't work when it comes to weight loss being the goal anyway. And there are so many reasons for that. I think, which we sort of covered before, but one of the key ones is that it gets you to focus on those external rules around food rather than listening to internal cues. So we're all so different. Our genetic makeups, our gut microbiomes, our personal preferences, our day-to-day routines, budgets, all that sort of stuff. Diets don't allow for all of those sorts of things in life. They don't allow for all of those nuances. It's very black and white and rigid. And, if we were robots, yeah, sure, maybe that would work well, but we're not. We're human beings. We've got all those lovely complex emotions and desires and things happening in our life. And dieting just doesn't allow for any of that to happen. It is very, very rigid and it is very, very prescriptive. And essentially, I think diets in that sense, they set you up for failure. They're sort of, you're doomed from the start when you try them. I think another really, really big reason that dieting doesn't work is, which we also touched on a little bit, is this scarcity mentality. So it's going to have restriction of some sort, whether that is physical restriction. So for example, restricting calories or cutting out food groups or anything like that. Or if it's what's also termed like a mental restriction. So that's all the internal dialogue that you have with yourself of, I shouldn't eat this, I shouldn't eat that, or the diet starts tomorrow, I'll be better next time, all of that kind of thing. Whenever there's restriction like that, there's going to be overcompensation that follows. And this is called the binge restrict cycle is what it's often termed. So there's a woman, an American woman called Isabel Foxen-Duke. She does a lot of work around binge eating and quote unquote emotional eating. And she has this really, really great analogy of binging and restricting being like a bow and arrow. So when you're restricting, it's like pulling back on the bow and, you can pull as much as you want and that's going to create so much tension. The longer you hold on for, the more tension there's going to be. The more you pull back, so the more restriction, the more tension there's going to be. but eventually your arm's going to get tired and you're going to have to let that go. And when that arrow goes flying in the other direction, that's like the binge. And, again, the longer you've held on for, the further that arrow is going to fly. And I think that is, it's a really good way to conceptualize and visualize this binge restrict sort of pattern that happens, this cycle that happens. And so, that's part of that whole dieting cycle. So you try to go on a diet, it might work for a little bit, you get those short-term results, but for various physiological and psychological reasons that only lasts for so long, you change your eating habits again, go back to old habits or whatever, weight gain might happen again, and then you get the guilt again, you start the dieting cycle again. And so, you keep going around in circles a lot of the time, essentially. But yeah, I think basically that can be another really, really big reason. And another one is definitely so majority of the time diets are for weight loss. And so the focus is on weight loss, not the actual health issues or the health behaviors or the emotions that need addressing. So I think a lot of the time diets are used as a sort of coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. Whether that is to give a sense of control or to give a distraction, it doesn't actually address those underlying issues at hand. It's sort of like a Band-Aid for a bullet wound type of approach.
You've kind of answered my next question, which was basically talking about yo-yo dieting and what that means. But just for the listeners, I just thought it might be nice to actually explain like what is a diet, because some people might not even realize if they're on a diet.
It's a really good point, actually. So, often when we think of diets, we'll think of really obvious ones. So, some of the ones at the moment that are really popular would be like keto or intermittent fasting, even like the paleo diet or sugar-free, gluten-free, all those sorts of ones. But dieting or what's called diet culture and dieting behaviors can be very, very sneaky and very nuanced as well. So anything that's going to give you any sorts of rules around what you should or shouldn't be eating or when to eat or anything like that, or any way that you are trying to control your food and eating habits in order to look or be a certain way, I would consider as a diet. So that might be, for example, I've already had one serve of carbs today, so I'm not going to have any more. Or, I'm not going to eat after a certain time at nighttime, or, I'll only eat this amount of, even if it's something like I'll only eat this amount of almonds, that's a serve and I can't have any more. Or I've just eaten, but I'm really hungry, but, I'm trying not to snack at the moment, so I'm going to wait again for another 3 hours before I eat again. Any of this sort of controlling sort of stuff around food is still very much a diet.
Yeah, I think we always do this. I think that was a really good point to bring up, Kirsten. I think it will relate to a lot of people because while per se people might not be following a diet at the moment, say, calorie restriction, keto, paleo, something so formal like that, I think what most people might realize with you explaining that, Nina, is that there are still some dieting patterns and thought choices coming up in their day-to-day, and it's kind of like we collect them along the way while we're going on through these different health fads and diets, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And the thing about all of that is that all of this stuff is so normalized. Like we've all grown up with it being such a normalized part of our culture, especially in Western society anyway. And so and a lot of the time it's deemed as healthy, it's encouraged, it's glorified. Yeah. It's not seen as a problem. So we're, if anything, encouraged to do it. So when you sort of start to realize, I do that and actually it might be problematic, it's a big realization for a lot of people. But once you start to see it, you kind of can't not see it, if that makes sense. Once you've had your eyes open to it, you start to see it everywhere.
Yeah, definitely. So in following on from that, what are some signs that people might be able to have a think about in terms of their eating patterns and their behaviors that might, relate to possibly them having a bit of I don't want to use the word negative relationship with food, but more of a complicated relationship with food because of all of this dieting influence and culture?
Yeah. I think maybe a good way to do it is to I can ask a few questions and people can just sort of think these answers to themselves. So, an obvious one is, are you always trying out the latest diets or health trends, things that you see on Instagram and wanting to give them a go? Do you fear or avoid certain foods? So do you feel anxious when you go to the supermarket and you're trying to make decisions about what to buy because you don't know what the healthiest option is? Or do you feel anxious perhaps when you go out for meals with friends because you're worried there's not going to be something that you can eat? Or do you even avoid social situations when it comes to food, whether that's with family or friends? Do you feel shame or guilt around food? That's a really, really big one. A lot of shame and guilt for a lot of people. Do you restrict yourself? So perhaps any of the ways that we've talked about so far, and oftentimes do you then find that you overcompensate with food later? So again, that might be, and these terms are very subjective, so different people hold different meanings for them, but different people will relate to terms like overeating or binge eating or emotional eating, or even eating in secret, essentially just feeling compulsive and out of control around food. Do you struggle with issues around body image and your weight? Are you always trying to lose weight or weighing yourself all the time? Do you engage in any sort of compensatory behaviors around food? So for example, if you go out for a meal and it's a big rich meal, something more than you'd usually eat, or you're at a party or whatever it might be, do you then say to yourself, I've got to go on an extra long run the next day? So exercise is a really, really big one. It's a big way to compensate for food. But even, trying dieting supplements, weight loss supplements. And then there are the more obvious examples. So for example, if you engage in things like self-induced vomiting after eating, that sort of thing. But there are a lot more things as well. There's, like we said, the rules around food before. So, like I can only eat X amount of a certain type of food a day, or cutting out certain food groups or types of food, calorie counting, compulsively looking at the ingredients labels or nutrition panels on foods, a real fixation on the quality of food. So that's what is sort of referred to these days as orthorexia, but being really, really hung up on, I can only eat healthy foods as well as a big one. So that there are lots. I've probably just rambled a whole bunch and listed a whole bunch, but there's a lot there, but I think there's some of the really key ones.
Thanks. It's really important that you shared that, because a lot of people don't know. And I had friends in school that displayed, and probably even myself displayed, some of those characteristics, and it was so normal, at the time. So you don't actually realize that, that's actually not normal, and that might be something that needs addressing. If you are someone who does identify with any of these, is there anywhere that you can go for support or help that you know of that might be useful?
Yeah, definitely. So different countries, they'll have different sort of, their main organisations will be different ones. But for example, in Australia, there's the Butterfly Foundation, is a really, really big one that works with eating disorders. In the UK, I believe there's one called Beat Eating Disorders, and that website is eatingdisorderhope.com, I'm pretty sure. There's also the National Eating Disorders Collaboration. And, these ones I'm mentioning, they're more so on eating disorders specifically, rather than, for example, disordered eating. And probably worth pointing out the difference between those, how I view it anyway. Disordered eating is sort of often the step that comes before an eating disorder. So it's when we start to have a lot of these behaviors and thoughts and feelings around food, but the frequency and severity might not be as much as what's required to be formally diagnosed with an eating disorder. But still, those websites they have really, really great information on them. A lot of them will have helplines or online forums and that sort of thing to get more information. I would also suggest going to a local healthcare practitioner. So if you Google, practitioner near you with words like non-diet or intuitive eating or HAES, so HAES, health at every size, you'll probably be able to find some really, really good practitioners. And people are always very welcome to also just reach out to me and have a chat to me, and I can help sort of steer them in the right direction for what sort of specific support they might need or want at that stage. Because it is always very, of course, individualized as well, depending on what stage someone's at.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to ask you at the end, but let's pop it in now. What is your Instagram handle, Nina, and your website so people can find you if they did want to reach out?
Yeah, so my website is just ninakingsfordsmith.com.au. And my sorry, my voice. My Instagram handle is at Healthy Happenings with Nina.
Amazing. And we'll pop those in the show notes so people can find you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So one thing that we haven't spoken about is like once somebody kind of works with a practitioner to kind of get past these thought patterns around food and their relationship with their body, that must create so much more space and freedom in their life, like ability to, you know, eat out with friends, just more space for thinking, more space for doing. I don't know, what are some of the things that you experience with your clients, Nina?
Yeah, I love that question. That's one of the most rewarding things about doing this sort of work, is just seeing the changes in people and how much more free and empowered they feel in themselves, and more confident. And just, it's like you can see this weight's being lifted off their shoulders. I think, one of the most, obvious examples is, of course, how they then relate to food differently. So instead of being so put in like a tiny little box of their food being so controlled and so guided by what they should or shouldn't eat, or even if it's feeling so out of control, if they're experiencing something like binge eating, they've just got this newfound way of relating to food. So again, it's, food it's so much more than just nutrients and calories and how it relates to certain aspects of health. It's about social connection and celebration and all that sort of fun stuff. So seeing them be able to engage with food in that way again is amazing. But then as well, a lot of the coexisting sort of health concerns that often go alongside all of this sort of stuff. So stress and anxiety being a really, really big one, depression as well, a lot of digestive issues and a lot of hormonal issues. So oftentimes period problems, but also thyroid issues and blood sugar dysregulation. Seeing improvements in all of those as well often will happen side by side, because that healing really sort of happens side by side. And then I'd say one of the other big things that I see is their change in relationship towards their bodies as well, and towards exercise specifically. So, it's all of this sort of stuff. Again, issues around eating aren't going to always be in relation to body image. There are a lot of reasons for it, but that is one of the key ones. And so seeing them have a more sort of peaceful relationship with their body is very much the same sort of thing in terms of having more freedom around it and more acceptance around it and just new perspectives on it. And then how that might carry on to their behaviors around exercise. So just being more embodied in general and really just enjoying being in their bodies and finding sort of really joyful ways to move and that sort of thing, rather than exercise being like quite a prescriptive process or like a thing that you have to do. It's actually something that's just quite enjoyable.
Do you have, just for when we finish up here, do you have any kind of last tips that you might give to someone that you can kind of quickly shout out here that might help someone foster a more positive relationship with food in their body?
Yeah, definitely. I would say a really key one is to do a social media detox. I'll often say to my clients, it's the only type of detox you're ever going to need to go on. So just literally go one day through your follower list, unfollow anybody who doesn't leave you feeling good about yourself. If it's like family or friend or whatever, and you don't feel you can unfollow them, I think you can mute their account these days. But then at the same time, fill your feed with really body positive or body neutral kind of content. Expose yourself to a variety of different bodies. So different sizes, shapes, abilities, all sorts of things. And things as well that have absolutely nothing to do with food and body. So, if you like gardening, some gardening accounts, or some, National Geographic or dog accounts or whatever it might be, but just expand that as well. And, there are all sorts of other resources as well, not just social media, but there are some really great documentaries, books, podcasts, all that sort of stuff that really, really can expose people to this sort of alternate way of thinking about food, alternative way about thinking about food. I do have a blog post that's got a whole bunch of resources on it, so I can send that to you guys to pop in the show notes as well, perhaps, because that's got different things. And I find, different things will appeal to different people. So some people are more podcast people, obviously people who are probably listening to this like podcasts, but blog posts, movies, all that kind of stuff, books as well. So, surround yourself with that sort of stuff. But also I would say become a really critical viewer of the media. So, again, ads are a really big one, but movies, TV shows, all that stuff as well. A really good question to ask is who profits from this? So do they really have your best interests at heart, or are they just trying to make money for themselves? And, remember that there's a whole, when it comes to images of people, if we're talking about body image, there's a whole team of people behind the scenes, airbrushing, using specific lighting, sitting in makeup chairs for hours on end and being in specific poses and all that stuff that are going to result in a really particular image being portrayed. And just a few other sort of brief ones I would say for helping people would be a lot of self-care and self-compassion and just that kind self-talk. So Kirsten is a woman who does a lot around self-compassion. I think her website is just self-compassion.org, and she has some really, really cool resources and exercises you can do there for that. But just to help reframe food and body, think about like all the sorts of things that your body does for you aside from how it looks, and same with food. So, food giving you energy to laugh and to sing and to dance, or your arms being there so that you can hug people, or your body being there so that you can sway about to music and really, really enjoy music, and all that sort of stuff as well. Just really starting to reframe a lot of that stuff, I think, can be really, really helpful as well. And then probably the last thing I would say is just honor your own boundaries around food and body. So if that means not engaging in that sort of diet talk with colleagues, know those boundaries and honor those boundaries for yourself. And there are as well really good blog posts online about how to deal with those sorts of conversations. There's a woman in America called Alyssa Rumsey who has a really good blog post on how to respond to diet talk. And that's really, really good for, if you are constantly around people who are talking about food and bodies in these sorts of problematic ways, how you can respond to that to honor your own boundaries as well. I think that's, probably a last one.
Yeah, no, that was all very useful, and you gave a lot there. So thank you. We'll definitely put your blog in the show notes if anyone wants to have a look at it. Okay, so that's everything for today.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, Nina. You've shared so much valuable information with us. We're really looking forward to bringing you on for this episode. So thank you for your time. And
amazing. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah. And for everyone listening, all of Nina's contact details will be in the show notes. So thank you so much again.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to our show today. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure that you subscribe, let us know what you thought in the comments, and share it with all the important women in your life. There are plenty more of these episodes to come, so please visit our website to stay in the know. You will find us at womanthings.com. That's WOMXN. Much love, Kirsten and Cara.
The information contained in this podcast is not intended to treat, diagnose, or replace the advice of your healthcare practitioner. Always consult with a qualified health professional if you have a pre-existing health condition or are currently taking any medications before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle.